Welcome to another exciting year in review. For those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English-language nutrition journal in the world, so you don't have to. Every year the presentation is brand new because every year the science is brand new. I then compile all the most interesting, the most groundbreaking, the most practical results into a quiz show format. When I do it live, I get everyone up on their feet, we play a bunch of games. If you get the answer right, you get to remain standing. If you get the answer wrong, you need to sit down, and we keep going to see who the last person is standing. The winning contestant each round wins a special CD-ROM I created containing 2,000 of the latest, greatest scientific articles on nutrition, categorized by topic. You're certainly welcome to play along at home as you watch this, but since you don't have a chance to win or participate in the discussion, here's my email address. Please don't hesitate to contact me anytime for anything, should any questions arise, or if you'd like me to send you copies of any of the scientific papers I cover this year. Every year, about 5,000 papers are published on human nutrition in the scientific literature. Although I go out of my way to share interesting, quirky, even counterintuitive new data, if you take a step back, nutritional science is remarkably consistent from one year to the next. My dietary recommendations do change every year based on the evolving science, but overall the message remains pretty much the same. Sometimes, though, on specific controversies, new data shifts the overall balance of evidence. Here are a few things I've covered in the past. Some were considered harmful: alfalfa sprouts, aspartame, chlorella supplements, Herbalife supplements, Juice Plus supplements, spirulina, vitamin E supplements, and yerba mate tea. Some of these were considered harmless: gum arabic and MSG. Last we knew, the jury was still out on stevia in terms of whether it was harmful or harmless, and then coffee and gluten were considered helpful, health-promoting foods. This year, at least one of these determinations has changed. The tipping point of evidence has been reached, and they fell into a different category. Which ones have changed? Let's start at the beginning, work our way across. Alfalfa sprouts. Considered dangerous because of the risk of food poisoning. But what's the latest? Should we keep avoiding raw alfalfa sprouts? Yes. Another major salmonella outbreak last year. The FDA and CDC recommend not eating raw alfalfa sprouts, so I continue to encourage people to eat broccoli sprouts instead. What about aspartame? Should we continue to avoid NutraSweet? Yes, probably a good idea, as there continues to be case reports of aspartame-induced brain conditions like pseudotumor cerebri. So no change there either. What about chlorella, blue-green algae supplements? Historically, the concern has been about a neurotoxin called BMAA. Should we continue to avoid blue-green algae? Yes. Previously, the only two places you could find this neurotoxin was in the brains of Alzheimer's patients and on your health food store shelf in the form of chlorella. But now it's been found a third place, in the brains of those dying from Lou Gehrig's disease. I'd continue to stay away from the stuff. What about coffee? There's some new data on coffee and liver cancer. Should coffee still be considered good for us? Yes. We knew it decreased our risk of diabetes, and there's new evidence to support that, but what we didn't know until last year is that it protects us from liver cancer as well, protects us from brain cancer, and protects us from death, decreased all-cause mortality. This shouldn't be a surprise. What is coffee but beans and water? It's a plant food. You know how soybeans have those healthy phytoestrogens? Well, now we know so does coffee. The reason I do not recommend drinking coffee is that there is something even healthier to drink instead, and that's tea. Coffee is beans in water, tea is dark green leafies in water, and though both are healthy, certainly, greens beat out beans, and pretty much everything else. What about gluten? For the vast majority of people, wheat protein, just like quinoa protein or any other grain, has been considered good for us, health-promoting, but only for about 99% of people. The rare 1% or so have celiac disease, and they have to stick to a gluten-free diet. But what about people who don't have celiac, but may be otherwise gluten-sensitive? Last year, the possibility was raised that some cases of irritable bowel syndrome, for example, may improve on a gluten-free diet. So if you do suffer from symptoms like chronic diarrhea and abdominal pain, your doctor may want to give a gluten-free diet a try. But if we don't have those symptoms, gluten is good for us. In fact, there was a study last year suggesting a gluten-free diet was bad for our good bacteria. So we shouldn't go gluten-free unless there's a good medical reason. What about gum arabic, the hardened sap of the acacia tree, used as a stabilizer in the food industry and for the lickable adhesive on the back of envelopes? Considered harmless, but there's actually some new data suggesting in large enough doses it may actually help feed our good bacteria. So I'm actually going to bump that up to helpful. What about Herbalife supplements? We were concerned about liver toxicity, and we're still concerned about liver toxicity. We think it may be because there's too much vitamin A. In fact, there's even been calls to have all animal-based vitamin A supplements just pulled from the shelves because of concerns about safety. Of course, it's naturally found in fish. This year, from the Journal of Food Protection, someone ate some red snapper and got vitamin A poisoning. Just a few hours after ingestion, headaches, vomiting, fever, visual disorientation, followed by peeling of the skin. This poor 41-year-old guy suffered serious peeling of the skin that took more than 3 months to heal. What about Juice Plus supplements, dubbed in the American Journal of Medicine as Toxicity Plus? Here's indicators of liver inflammation before Juice Plus, the huge spike, and then coming down after stopping it. What about MSG? The scientific consensus has been that MSG is generally harmless, but what's the latest? Monosodium glutamate allergy, menace or myth? Myth. Despite concerns raised in the 1960s, decades of research have failed to demonstrate a clear and consistent relationship between MSG and the kinds of reactions people typically attribute to it. What about spirulina? The reason I told everyone to throw their spirulina away was that it was found to produce hepatotoxins. While chlorella has the brain toxins, spirulina can have liver toxins. Should we continue to avoid the stuff? Yes. Now, spirulina can boast neurotoxins as well. Last year, a potent neurotoxin was found in spirulina for the first time. The jury is finally in on stevia. The reason it's been such a long time coming is that research out of Japan in the 90s found that steviosides, the active ingredient in stevia, appeared totally harmless. But in the guts of rats, intestinal bacteria transformed steviosides into something called steviol, which is toxic, causing a big spike in mutagenic DNA damage. So the question was, do we have those same rat bacteria in our guts? And it turns out we do. So we know that when we eat stevia, mutagenic compounds are produced in our colons and absorbed into our bloodstream. The only remaining question was, how much? The World Health Organization just released their latest evaluation of food additives, and they consider up to 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight safe. So that's 1.8 milligrams per pound. So if you multiply your weight in pounds times 1.8, that's how many milligrams of stevia compounds you should stay under. The problem is the American sweet tooth. We're supposed to stay under 4, but if we sweetened everything with stevia, we could exceed that safety limit, at least in the United States. But as long as you only drink like 2 stevia-sweetened beverages a day, it can be considered harmless. What about vitamin E? The concern has been that vitamin E supplements increase all-cause mortality, meaning those taking vitamin E live, on average, a shorter life. And now we know just how much shorter. A QALY, a quality-adjusted life year, is defined as a year of healthy, illness-free life. If you take vitamin E supplements, you live, on average, 0.3 QALYs less than if you did not take vitamin E supplements. So by buying vitamin E, you're paying to erase like 4 healthy, illness-free months from your lifespan. Still harmful. And finally, what about yerba mate, a Latin American herbal tea that's been linked to cancer? Should we continue to avoid it? Yes. An evaluation of the cytotoxic and genotoxic activity of yerba mate on human white blood cells found it caused a significant increase in the rate of cell death. Not what you want from your herbal tea. Walking through the herbal tea aisle can be daunting. Thankfully, last year this study was published comparing the antioxidant activity of more than a dozen different types of herbal tea. They're all good for you, so the healthiest one is probably the one you'll drink the most of, but if you don't have a favorite, which is healthiest? Bergamot tea, chamomile, dandelion, fennel, jasmine, hawthorn, lavender, lemongrass, lemon verbena, peppermint, rooibos, also known as red tea, rosemary tea, thyme tea, or rosehip tea. For years I've been looking for good herbal tea data, and here it was, all in one place, thanks to a group of intrepid Korean investigators. For their first elimination round, let's pick the top 10. There are 14 listed here. The first 3 to drop out of the running: bergamot, fennel, and thyme. Then, even peppermint doesn't make the top 10 cut. Here are the top 5: chamomile, dandelion, lemongrass, rooibos, and rosehip. And the number 1 most antioxidant-packed herbal tea? Dandelion. Who would have guessed? In 2008, black beans beat out lentils by a hair and remain the reigning champ for most laudable legume in terms of antioxidants. But with regards to protein, iron, zinc, and folate, lentils actually triumph over black beans. The problem is you go to the store and there are 3 different kinds: red lentils, green lentils, and French green lentils. Which is healthiest? We didn't know until this year. Well, it's not green lentils spilling the beans. Red lentils are healthiest. You also may remember how the USDA measured the antioxidant content of various varieties of apples. Red Delicious shot to number 1, with Granny Smith in a surprise upset taking the number 2 slot. But people kept asking me, what about Cortland? What about Empire? What about McIntosh? Everyone has their own favorite. Someone even asked me, what about crab apples? And all I could say was, I have no clue. That's all anyone could in fact say, because they hadn't been tested. Until now. 21 different varieties tested. I mean, why bite into a Red Delicious when you can bite into a good old 569181 apple? There's actually 7,500 different types of apples, but let's look at some crowd favorites. In alphabetical order: Braeburn, Cortland, crab apples, Empire, Golden Nugget, Honeycrisp, and Ida Red. Here's the graph, and we have a new winner. In fact, 2 new winners, putting Red Delicious in its place. We have a new loser, too, less nutritious than even a Fuji. Let's start there. Which one's the least nutritious apple? And the bad apple is Golden Nugget. What about number 1? Mirror, mirror on the wall, which is the healthiest of them all? Let's take a bite out of the tree of knowledge. Crab apples. Crab apples? Gross. What's this one, though? What's the healthiest apple you can actually buy? 5 options left to choose from: Braeburn, Cortland, Empire, Honeycrisp, or Ida Red. Well, it's not McIntosh, not Empire, not Braeburn — I love Braeburn — and not Cortland. The healthiest apple beating out Red Delicious is Ida Red. The best fruits for cancer prevention in general are probably berries, which are considered ideal cancer preventive agents. In fact, there are now 7 clinical trials underway to treat cancer and precancerous lesions with black raspberries, for example, by any means necessary, even if they have to stick them up patients' butts. The preliminary results from that study are actually pretty amazing, though. After 9 months of treatment, half of their rectal polyps disappeared. Normally you have to go in and cut them out, but the berries made them just totally regress back into the body. But don't try this at home. They were stuffing so many raspberries up there, 20% of the patients developed rectal fissures. I will spare you the pictures. Therefore, the use of black raspberry suppositories for future trials is questionable. I recommend just eating them. Let them take the long way round. What about this, though? Fruits and vegetables have little effect? Eating veggies doesn't stop cancer? Here's the study they're talking about: fruit and vegetable intake and overall cancer risk in the EPIC study. Here's the data. For those unfamiliar with the metric system, a large apple officially weighs 223 grams. So, compared to people eating about less than an apple a day, those eating 1 or more had a 5% decrease in overall cancer risk across the board, and those who ate the most fruits and vegetables had 11% lower risk. Here's the conclusion. The study supports the notion of a modest cancer preventive effect of high intake of fruits and vegetables. But what about those headlines? They made it sound like fruits and veggies didn't offer any protection. It's not that fruits and vegetables didn't prevent cancer in the study, it's just how modest the preventive effect was. The bottom line is we can't, eat a standard Western diet and just add a few fruits and vegetables and expect to be cancer-proof. We have to fundamentally change our diets. Still, even if we're living off burgers and donuts, a 5% drop in overall cancer risk means that an apple a day may keep 1 in 20 cancers away. That's not too bad. How much does an apple cost? 1.5 million Americans are diagnosed with cancer every year. This study suggests that if we all ate lots of fruits and vegetables, 168,000 cancers could be prevented every year in the United States. 168,000 cancers. If that's modest, I'll take it. And they were counting like iceberg lettuce as a vegetable. It would have been interesting to see what some of the more powerful fruits and vegetables could do. Berries, citrus, garlic, greens. Right? And of course, there's lots of other health reasons to eat fruits and vegetables besides just cancer. For example, 11 years ago, blueberries gained notoriety for their ability to improve memory among elderly rats. Now, it's always difficult to extrapolate between species, but I told people it might translate over and not just work in rats, but work for their pet hamsters too. But we finally, this year, have human data, the first human trial to assess the potential benefit of blueberry supplementation on neurocognitive function. What do you think they found? Blueberries improve memory in humans. Is this fact, or is this fiction? Let's look at the study. Blueberries improve memory in humans. Fact. And it turns out the healthful properties may survive processing into products like blueberry jam, but best to store it in the fridge even before it's opened. You may remember back in Volume 2, I compared the effects of different cooking methods on the phytonutrients in broccoli. Well, last year, food scientists outdid themselves. They looked at 20 different vegetables, 6 different cooking methods, and then looked at 3 separate measures of antioxidant activity. That's over 300 separate experiments to figure out what's the best way to cook our vegetables. First, though, let's figure out the worst. In terms of loss of antioxidant content, baking, boiling, frying, George Foreman, nuking, or pressure cooking. The worst is boiling. What's the second worst? The pressure cooking. When we use these wet cooking methods, some of the nutrition is lost into the cooking water. Maybe less than you think, though. Averaged over those 20 vegetables, boiling only removes about 14% of the antioxidant. So if you really like boiled broccoli, fine, just eat 1 more floret. 7 florets of boiled broccoli has all the antioxidant power of 6 florets of raw broccoli. So the best way to eat your veggies is really whichever way will get you to eat the most of them, with the exception of frying, which just adds way too many empty calories. What's the gentlest cooking method, though? Out of these remaining 4, which preserves antioxidants the best? It was the microwave, preserving 97.3% of the antioxidants. But that's on average across 20 vegetables. There was one vegetable whose antioxidants get clobbered no matter how you cook it. Up to 75% of the antioxidant power gone. Which is the one vegetable really best to eat raw? Artichoke hearts, asparagus, beets, broad beans, broccoli. Hope we don't have to eat raw Brussels sprouts. Cauliflower, carrots, celery, eggplant, garlic, green beans, leeks, corn on the cob, onions, peas, bell pepper, spinach, Swiss chard, or zucchini. The most vulnerable vegetable is bell peppers. Do try to eat those raw. On the other hand, there were 3 vegetables that weren't affected by cooking at all. You could even boil them and lose no antioxidants. Can you guess at least one of the 3? The 3 were artichokes, beets, and onions. Boil away. Asparagus actually gets honorable mention here, unaffected by all but frying, so you can boil asparagus too. Final question, and perhaps most interesting. There are 2 vegetables that, no matter what you do to them, they increase in antioxidant value. They become healthier. Which 2 are they? First, the honorable mention, green beans. With the exception of boiling and pressure cooking, they actually increase in antioxidant power when you cook them. So microwave green beans are actually healthier than raw green beans. But which 2 vegetables always increase in value, no matter how you cook them? Carrots and celery. So when you make a nice vegetable soup, we're actually boosting the nutrition. It's not what you eat, though, but what you absorb. Check out this study on long-term raw foodists. This study was done in Europe, so the average Western diet here wasn't terrible. 4 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, versus a better diet, 7 servings a day of fruits and veggies, both raw and cooked, versus a raw food diet, in which they ate, on average, a whopping 17 servings of fruits and veggies a day, leading them to have about 3 times the beta-carotene intake. But that's intake. How much of it actually got into their bloodstream? Blood beta-carotene is considered a good surrogate marker for a healthy diet. Tell me what your blood beta-carotene level is, and I'll tell you what your health risk is. So who had the most beta-carotene in their bodies? Those eating 4 servings a day, 7, or 14? It was the middle group, the 7 servings a day group, because cooking can boost the absorption of phytonutrients like beta-carotene, like the cooked carrots having more antioxidants than raw. The raw foodists here were eating 17 servings a day, and basically had the same amount of this phytonutrient reaching their internal organs as those on the crappy standard diet. So I recommend a combination of raw and cooked foods. Frying is not just bad because it destroys more nutrition, and oil is such a waste of calories. We should never deep fry foods because of the toxic volatile carcinogens that are produced. In fact, we shouldn't even let anyone deep fry in our house. Like secondhand smoke, they may be putting your whole household at risk because of the air pollution created by deep frying. If they insist, though, we should definitely want to open the windows, keep the kitchen ventilated, and some oils are worse than others. What's the worst oil to deep fry with? Canola, coconut, safflower, or extra virgin olive. The worst is coconut, which should never be used, period. What's the least harmful? Canola was the oil generating the least amount of potentially toxic chemicals. Speaking of toxic chemicals, last year we learned that some soft drinks have benzene in them. Well, this year, another beverage was found to have benzene levels exceeding safety standards. Which one was it? Apple juice, beer, carrot juice, coffee, red wine, or white? It was the carrot juice. There are some natural components in carrot juice that are turned to benzene when you heat it. Now, fresh carrot juice has no benzene, nor do carrots themselves. The safety limit for benzene in drinking water is 1 microgram. Pasteurized carrot juice has that 1 microgram, and bottled twice that. Now, drinking water standards are made to be conservative because they assume we're drinking cups a day, but better to just eat carrots or juice our own. New game. Good, bad, or useless? Helpful, harmful, or just a waste of money? First up, zinc-containing nasal gel is a cold remedy. It's unclear whether oral zinc supplements help with a cold, but what about squirting zinc up your nose? Good, bad, or just snake oil? Bad. More than 100 reports of people losing their sense of smell, some permanently, forever. What about rose hips for osteoarthritis? Osteoarthritis is a degenerative joint disease that's very frustrating to treat, and worse to have, no doubt. It can be painful and debilitating. Rose hips have long been considered the traditional herbal remedy. Rose hips are the fruits of the rose bush. Good, bad, or useless? Good, resulting in a significant reduction in pain, and it may help with rheumatoid arthritis too. What if you don't have any rose bushes, though? You can get them dried in bulk at your local natural food store and just eat them straight. For arthritis sufferers, I'd recommend asking your doctor about starting on a dose of 10 rosehip berries a day. Rheumatoid arthritis can be a disfiguring condition. The treatment often involves some of the most toxic drugs, steroids, chemotherapy agents, thalidomide. We've known for 10 years that meat consumption may play a major role based on these kind of data, where it appears the more meat populations eat, the higher the prevalence of the disease, and so eating vegetarian may reduce our chances of getting rheumatoid arthritis. But once you already have it, does it matter what you eat? Vegetarian diets can be used to successfully treat rheumatoid arthritis. Fact or fiction? Fact. Nearly every single study ever published on the matter has shown that vegetarian diets can indeed be used to successfully treat the disease. Some tested vegetarian diets with or without fasting, some tested vegan diets, some tested raw vegan diets, some even used gluten-free raw vegan diets. The one thing they all shared in common was that they were all vegetarian, and that they all worked. The only really remaining question is why. Is rheumatoid arthritis an autoimmune meat-induced joint attack, or are the meat proteins themselves involved in attacking the joints? This is from earlier this year. A case report of a woman eating eggs, dairy, and meat with joint inflammation so bad she was on chemo and steroids, until she stopped ingesting animal products, and her symptoms disappeared when she just ate plant proteins. She could turn on and off her disease like a light switch. It even says how she ate meat the night before her doctor's appointment, just to show the doctor that she really did have bad arthritis. When susceptible people put all these foreign animal proteins in their body, one of two things may happen. When we nibble on the cartilage at the end of a chicken's leg, our immune system may react to these foreign cartilage proteins by producing anti-cartilage antibodies that may get confused and start attacking our own cartilage. That's what they mean by meat-induced joint attack. The other possibility is that even if there are no cross-reactivity confusion, the immune complexes formed by the meat proteins in our antibodies may migrate into our joints and trigger inflammation that way. It's actually interesting how they're doing some of these experiments. When scientists want to know if someone's truly reacting to animal protein, they can't just give them bacon and eggs and ask how they're feeling, because you have to have a placebo control to compare the food to, and people are going to know if they're eating bacon and eggs or a sugar pill. So how do you get food into somebody in a way that bypasses the taste buds? You stick it up their butt. Reactivity after a rectal food challenge in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. Again, don't try this at home. There's another inflammatory autoimmune condition called oral lichen planus, in which your immune system starts attacking the lining of your mouth. This is what it looks like. It's actually not that rare, strikes up to 2% of the population, and there's no cure, and the available treatments are pretty nasty in themselves: steroids, immunosuppressants. Sometimes the lesions can even turn into cancer. Thankfully, scientists just discovered a new treatment, a treatment with no side effects, a treatment leading to remarkable clinical improvement in the vast majority of patients, even total remission. And it's just a plant. A simple, common plant. Which one is it? Is it artichoke, celery root, fiddlehead ferns, Jerusalem artichokes, which are actually the roots of sunflowers, hence the term sunchoke, purslane, or watercress? I gave a hint when I said it was a common plant. It is in fact one of the most common plants in the world, purslane. Lichen planus is not the same thing as aphthous ulcers, also known as canker sores, which are much less serious but much more common. Some people have recurring problems with them, where they keep coming back over and over, and we didn't know why in most cases until last year. An immune reaction against cow's milk proteins and wheat proteins, gliadin is a gluten protein, within the cause of recurrent aphthous ulcers. You tell me, dairy, gluten, or both, or neither? Gluten had nothing to do with it. It was the dairy. 2/3 of the recurrent canker sore sufferers had high levels of anti-cow's milk protein antibodies in their bloodstream. The thought is that the cow's milk protein themselves penetrate deep into the lining of the mouth, inducing a major immune disorder where our body attacks the foreign cow proteins, and in doing so ulcerates our mucosal lining. To test this, a few of the patients stopped eating all dairy, a cow's milk protein-free diet, and the ulcers disappeared, with no reappearance of clinical disease until they tried adding back dairy. Same thing with the next patient, went into complete remission, with a reappearance of ulcerations only after some ice cream had been consumed. This is really exciting news for sufferers of this painful condition. What about homeopathy? Not for canker sores, but for ADHD, asthma, cancer, dementia, influenza, and the induction of labor. A meta-analysis of all the best studies was published this year, covering all those conditions. Homeopathy, good, bad, or a waste of money? According to the best science we have, useless. Homeopathy advocates claim that the medical establishment's campaign against them is no more than a witch hunt. It didn't help matters this year when the British Medical Association declared homeopathy is witchcraft. Woman walks into an emergency room, complaining of a sore throat after eating fish the previous morning. On exam, she has a lump in her neck, so they take a scalpel, slice it open, and what pops out but a fish bone, a migrating fish bone presenting as an acute onset of a neck lump. It went out her throat next to her voice box into her neck, and just barely missed her carotid artery, in which case she would have probably bled to death, but thankfully it missed the artery, and after 5 days in the hospital she was all better. The number one digestive reason people are hospitalized, though, is because of a gallbladder attack. Every year, more than 1 million Americans are diagnosed with gallstones, and about 700,000 have to get their gallbladder surgically removed. What are gallstones made of? In 80 to 90% of cases, the gallstones are made out of cholesterol. Here's a picture of someone's gallbladder packed with gallstones. All that yellow you see making up the stones is pure crystallized cholesterol that built up in this person's body. If the only source of dietary cholesterol is animal foods, one might expect meat-eaters to be at higher risk. Turns out you have to go all the way to Kathmandu to find some good science. Non-vegetarians were found to be at higher risk for gallstones than vegetarians, but not just a little more risk, 9 times the risk, 9 to 1 odds of getting gallstones, non-vegetarians versus vegetarians. Of course, the primary concern is not cholesterol in our gallbladder, but cholesterol in our coronary arteries, leading to our number one cause of death, heart disease. People come to me all the time and say, "Oh, I don't have to worry about what I eat because my cholesterol's normal." Well, having a normal cholesterol in a society in which it's normal to die from heart disease is not saying much. Having an average cholesterol means dying in average death. This is from the Harvard Heart Letter. Once upon a time, average was thought to be perfectly okay, but average cholesterol no longer makes the grade. Lower is better. In fact, way below average is the new target. How low can you go? Well, we're born with a total cholesterol down around 50. But then it quickly bounds upward, elevated by meat and milk and fatty foods, generally breaking into the 200s by middle age, more raw material for making artery-clogging plaque. The target is an LDL, the bad cholesterol, under 70, which means a total cholesterol around under 150. How do you do that? How do you get a total cholesterol of 150? Well, you could move to the planet of the apes, or just eat a strictly plant-based diet. Avoiding meat is only one part of the picture. A healthy vegetarian diet should be chock full of foods with known benefits. Within the last 12 months, 8 products were tested, some for the first time ever, to see what they would do to our LDL, our bad cholesterol. Almonds, Cheerios, cola, flax seeds, flax oil, kiwi fruits, red yeast rice, and strawberries. First up, almonds, packed with nutrition, but might they raise our cholesterol? Or does eating almonds not affect our cholesterol? Or does eating almonds lower our cholesterol? Almonds lower our cholesterol. What about the hype about Cheerios? Do they really lower cholesterol? Yes, they do, but they also have a tablespoon of sugar in them per serving, and that's before you add extra sugar. We should stick to oatmeal for the best of both worlds. Obviously, soda is just plain bad for us, but does it actually affect our cholesterol? Only the cola. Isn't that interesting? The other sodas don't do it, so colas are particularly bad for us. Flax seeds are a given, definitely lower our cholesterol, but what about flaxseed oil? It doesn't work. Flax seeds, but not flaxseed oil, lowers our cholesterol. Another reason the ground seeds are better. Kiwis are definitely a first. No one had ever tested their ability to affect our cholesterol until now. 2 kiwis a day for 8 weeks significantly improved cholesterol levels. What a yummy way to help our hearts. Red yeast rice. It's actually red mold rice, moldy rice, a fermented food prized in Chinese medicine, which can be taken as a supplement. Does it work? Yes, it does, because the red mold actually produces lovastatin, sold for billions of dollars as Mevacor. Just like there's a mold that makes penicillin, well, there's a mold that makes a cholesterol medication. The problem is, by eating the rice, you could have all the side effects, but without the dose standardization. And finally, speaking of yummy ways to lower our cholesterol, what about strawberries? I wish. Strawberries have all sorts of amazing properties, but as I've documented over the years, but unfortunately, lowering our cholesterol is not one of them. A plant-based diet is best, but what kind of plant-based diet? A review last year looked at all the randomized controlled trials to date. Using a meat-eating group as the control, it compared people eating like a Mediterranean-style diet that minimizes meat, versus a meat-free diet, versus a meat, dairy, and egg-free diet. You can't really directly compare all the studies because they were all on slightly different diets for different durations, studying different populations of people. But in general, people cutting out most meat cut out a quarter of their risk. Those cutting out all meat cut their risk of our #1 killer in half, and those that eliminated dairy and eggs did even better still. But there's kind of 2 popular styles of vegan diets. There's those pushing very low fat, versus those that encourage high-fat whole food sources like nuts. Which one works better? A whole foods vegan diet, chock full of nuts, may wipe out as much as 80% of our risk of falling victim to the #1 killer. Who needs lettuce, lentils, legumes, though, when we have Lipitor? This was actually a bad year for statins, the cholesterol-lowering drugs. We've known about their potential to damage the liver. That's why you have to get regular blood tests to check your liver function. But there's some new data this year on their muscle toxicity. We've known that about 1 to 5% of patients suffer enough muscle damage to cause pain and overt weakness, but only about 1 in 6 or 7 million actually suffers enough muscle damage to kill them. It's called fatal rhabdomyolysis, where your muscles break down so rapidly your urine starts looking like this as you literally start peeing your muscles down the toilet, then your kidneys fail and you die. But that's like winning the lottery chances. Right? There's 1 in 2 chance we'll die of heart disease, so no surprise, this is the #1 prescribed drug in the world. But then, this study was published last year. Normally, if you have muscle pain on a statin, you go to your doctor and they take blood and see if you have elevated levels of muscle breakdown products in your bloodstream. If you don't, they basically say, it's all in your head, go home, keep taking your medicine. What these researchers did, though, was they instead took these people and got their muscles biopsied, and proved that even though their blood levels were normal, they were indeed suffering muscle damage. The damage just wasn't leaking into their bloodstream. Well, if that's the case, if you can't pick it up on the test, maybe everyone taking statins is suffering muscle damage, whether they're experiencing pain or not. And that's exactly what's been found. Clear evidence of muscle damage in statin-treated patients. This is what your muscle is supposed to look like under a microscope. This is your muscle. This is your muscle on a statin drug. Still, the degree of overall damage was slight. Most people don't even feel any pain with statins. So what's the big deal? This is the big deal. New study on statins, muscle function, and fall risk. Hundreds of older men and women followed for a few years, and those who were on statins suffered greater declines in muscle strength and performance, and an increased risk of falls. So we don't want to be taking this drug unless we really need it. The problem is, because heart disease remains our #1 killer, most everyone does need it, except for one group. It's our choice. Can our cholesterol be too low, though? In the 1980s, some studies came out showing that many people dying from cancer have really low cholesterol. There are two possible explanations for this correlation. The cancer led to the low cholesterol, or maybe low cholesterol led to cancer. That wouldn't be good. To this day, there are doctors telling people not to let their cholesterol get too low based on that data. Are they right? Can our bad cholesterol, LDL, be too low? The answer is no. It appears our cholesterol can never be too low. The lower the better. Brand new studies have put the controversy to rest. In fact, the opposite may be true. Lower cholesterol means less heart disease risk, and now we know it may lower cancer risk as well. Last year, pancreatic cancer ate Patrick Swayze alive. Before him, it was Pavarotti. Pancreatic cancer is one of the deadliest cancers. Less than 5% of victims even make it out 5 years. Thankfully, it's rare. Only strikes down about 30 or 40,000 Americans every year. But how do you study something that's so rare? You bring to bear the largest study ever. The NIH AARP study is currently following 500,000 American men and women in their 50s and 60s. It is the largest forward-looking nutrition study ever conducted. What did we just learn from it about pancreatic cancer? Well, we've known pancreatic cancer was a lifestyle-related disease, related to smoking and the dietary intake of fat. But what kind of fat? Enter the NIH AARP study. What do you think they found? Who thinks pancreatic cancer is associated with beef fat? Bacon, chicken, fish, dairy, eggs? Anyone want to change their answer to none of the above? What about all of the above? The answer, according to the largest such study ever, is all of the above. Dietary fat of animal origin was associated with increased pancreatic cancer risk. What about dietary fat of plant origin? I covered up the rest of the conclusion so we could find out together. Who thinks your typical vegetable oil is associated with pancreatic cancer? The plant fat largely found in nuts, the saturated fat found in chocolate and coconut milk? All of the above? None of the above? Let's look at the rest of the conclusion. Dietary fat of animal origin was associated with increased pancreatic cancer risk. And that's the end of the conclusion. Pancreatic cancer is significantly associated with red meat, significantly associated with dairy, and when one adds in all other meats, fish and eggs, it makes the cancer connection even stronger. But no association with plant fat. Conclusion: evidence of a role for animal fat in the development of pancreatic cancer, but no connection with any kind of fat from plant food sources. What if we just eat animal foods that are low-fat, like skim milk? An even newer study out this year found an even stronger link between pancreatic cancer and animal protein, an even tighter correlation than with animal fat. Plant protein, on the other hand, appeared protective. Even animal sugars are associated with pancreatic cancer. There's only one animal sugar, lactose. So animal fat, animal protein, and animal carbs all independently associated with pancreatic cancer risk. The NIH AARP study also looked at diet, lifestyle, and acute myeloid leukemia. Two things seemed to do it: smoking and total meat intake, which included all beef, chicken, fish, pork, bacon, etc. Since they measured the effect of both smoking and meat intake, we have a rare opportunity to actually compare the two in terms of cancer risk. So in terms of our risk of getting this rare but deadly blood cancer, this much meat, 2 boneless chicken breasts worth, may increase our leukemia risk as much as smoking 10 cigarettes. So what if we don't eat any meat? The most comprehensive study of cancer rates in vegetarians was published last year. No surprise that vegetarians had significantly less cancer than meat eaters. Perhaps the most striking finding was how low the risk was for lymphoma and leukemia among vegetarians. Just a quarter of the risk of multiple myeloma in vegetarians compared to meat eaters, an aggressive, incurable cancer of the bone marrow. Potential mechanisms include the mutagenic compounds in meat and the viruses. Last year I talked about butcher's warts, a condition that afflicts those who handle fresh meat for a living because of the viruses in meat, but it's more than just a cosmetic issue. Earlier this year, a landmark study of cancer mortality in poultry workers was released. We've known that people who handle a lot of fresh chicken get a lot of warts on their hands, but the concern is that some of the wart viruses are oncogenic, or cancer-causing. Workers in poultry slaughtering and processing are exposed to these cancer-causing viruses, some of which are the most potent cancer-causing agents known in animals. But what does that mean for people? Well, compared to the general population, poultry workers appear to have excess cancers of the mouth, nasal cavities, throat, cancer of the tongue, the tonsils, the inner ear, then down the esophagus, rectal anal cancer, and liver, bone marrow, and blood cancers as well. The reason it's so important to study this group is because it's possible that the cancer-causing viruses present in poultry and poultry products could be transmitted to anyone handling raw poultry. Proper cooking will kill any and all chicken, wart, and cancer viruses, but the problem is that meat may come into our homes fresh or frozen and contaminate our hands or kitchen surfaces before it gets into the pot. Same concern with other meat. There's a fascinating case report about pork intake and human papillomavirus, HPV, which can cause cancerous anal and genital warts. Poor guy, 19 years old, giant warty tumor, nearly an inch in diameter, protruding from the tip of his penis. They cut it off, but it just grew right back. And so they asked for a dietary history. He was eating more than a pound of pork a day. They told him to stop the pork, and the tumor completely regressed on its own, totally disappeared. The doctors were so blown away, they even went as far as to suggest that the low cervical cancer rates in Israel could be because they eat so little pork. You've probably heard of hepatitis A, which you can get traveling in the Third World. Then we discovered hepatitis B, which is often sexually transmitted, and then we discovered hepatitis C, which we can get from IV drug use. That's not what your liver is supposed to look like. Well, we're up to hepatitis E virus now, and its mode of transmission was just figured out. From the CDC this year, much meat, much malady. It is now known that hepatitis E is a zoonotic disease, an animal-to-human disease, and pigs are the reservoirs of the hepatitis E virus. It all started years ago when Japanese researchers linked hepatitis E infection with the consumption of grilled pork liver. They went to grocery stores, tested pig livers, and indeed found evidence of the virus in 2% of the meat. But just because the virus was there doesn't mean it's necessarily infectious, so U.S. researchers tried grocery stores here and found the virus in more than 10% of the meat off the shelves. This was the first report demonstrating that commercial pig livers from grocery stores contain infectious hepatitis E virus. The results from this study raise additional public health concerns about pork safety and the risk of hepatitis E infection. Just because there's infectious virus in retail meat, though, doesn't mean it could survive cooking. Well, unfortunately, it seems that some virus would most likely survive the internal temperatures of rare cooked meat. Yeah, but who eats pig liver? What about other pork products? Well, just this year, a more extensive survey of pig tissues was carried out, and indeed they found the virus in the animal's bloodstream, so suspect it could get basically anywhere in the meat. In fact, it's possible that the relatively high exposure rates found among normal blood donors in the United States and other countries may be a result of individuals consuming hepatitis E virus-contaminated pork. So researchers decided to do a cross-country comparison, mortality from liver disease versus the consumption of pig meat. As a kind of control, they first looked at liver disease mortality and alcohol consumption, because we know alcohol is toxic to the liver. And indeed, they found a clear relationship. The countries with the highest alcohol consumption tended to be the countries with the highest mortality from liver disease. No surprise there. Then they looked at pork, and found an even tighter correlation. Death rates from liver failure were even more closely related to pork consumption than they were to even alcohol consumption. Just so vegetarians don't get cocky, though, once someone is infected through pork, they may then transmit the infection through their feces to other people. So if you live with someone who likes their pork a little pink in the middle, make sure they wash their hands after using the toilet. Speaking of toilets, last year there was a review of fish-induced carriuria. I had to look that one up myself. It turns out there are a bunch of fish that store large amounts of waxy substances in their bodies, and if we eat them, the accumulation of the indigestible wax in our rectums through consumption of these fish engenders rectal discharges or leakage of orange or brownish-green oil. Carriuria is greasy orange anal leakage. Carry is the Greek word for wax. The scientists were even nice enough to include a picture, though sadly not in color, also highlighted the potential for embarrassment from stained clothing arising from the unanticipated passage of oil as an aerosol with flatulence. So much potential for embarrassment, there have even been demonstrations demanding immediate government actions against the quote-unquote fish-induced carriuria epidemic. Last year, the University of Bristol celebrated their 100-year anniversary. Prestigious institution of higher learning produced 9 Nobel laureates and the Bristol Stool Scale, a medical tool used to classify the fecal form. 7 different classifications. Type 1 looks like rabbit droppings, separate hard lumps, like nuts, hard to pass. Number 2 looks like a bunch of grapes, sausage-shaped but lumpy. Type 3 looks like corn on the cob. Type 4 like a sausage or snake, smooth and soft. Type 5 looks like chicken nuggets. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at chicken nuggets quite the same way ever again. Type 6 looks like porridge. Type 7 looks like gravy. Gotta love them Brits. The best number 2 is a number 4, smooth and soft snake. Unfortunately, only a minority of adults enjoy normal bowel function, and only about half pass normal stools. Wow. And younger women, due to hormonal fluctuations throughout their cycle, are particularly disadvantaged. But this is for people eating a standard Western diet. Wouldn't it be neat if some researchers compared bowel function measurements between individuals eating different diets? It would, and they did. Bowel function was assessed omnivores versus vegetarians versus vegans. Each subject was provided with a stool collection kit, a stack of boxes, each used to accommodate one stool only, reducing the risk of specimens becoming squashed. They weren't messing around. So, meat eaters, versus plant eaters, put to the test. First question, where did the meat eaters fall? Does the average bowel movement of a meat eater look like rabbit droppings, bunches of grapes, corn on the cob, a smooth and soft sausage, chicken nuggets, oatmeal, or gravy? Meat eaters, on average, poop out corn cob stools. What about vegetarians? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7? Number 4, right where we want to be. And finally, what about vegans? On average, number 4 as well. But vegans actually ended up beating vegetarians because none of the vegans had the hard rabbit turd stools, whereas a few of the vegetarians, like a bunch of the meat eaters, struggled to pass type 1s. And the smooth vegan snakes were softer, exactly 18% softer. How could they tell? Using a stool penetrometer, of course. An editorial in the Canadian Medical Association Journal celebrated the finding this year, calling on doctors to tell all their patients to eat a plant-based diet, as vegetarian diets can only help push patients into the comfortable middle range of the much-beloved Bristol stool scale. Last year, we played the USDA parasite game. This year, we can play the fecal bacteria game, thanks to the Centers for Disease Control, which tests retail meat to see how much fecal matter contamination they can find. First up, Salmonella, a fecal pathogen that can trigger something called Reiter's syndrome, where you come down with Salmonella food poisoning once, and you can end up with chronic debilitating arthritis for the rest of your life, and all sorts of other grisly consequences. Where's Salmonella found the most? Chicken, turkey, beef, or pork? I would have guessed chicken, but no. Turkey was nearly twice as risky in the latest annual survey in terms of Salmonella contamination. But what percentages are we talking about? Who thinks greater than 50% of turkey has Salmonella in it, or is it less than 50%? Thankfully, less than 50%. Only about 1 in 7 retail packages of poultry has the potential to permanently cripple us. Better odds than Russian roulette. Seriously, though, why are American consumers placed at such high risk? Earlier this year, in a meat industry trade publication, an article was published on how countries in Europe boast extremely low Salmonella rates. They've gotten Salmonella contamination in poultry as low as 2%. How do they do it? While countries like Sweden still find some Salmonella-positive flocks, the difference is that it is illegal there to sell Salmonella-positive chicken. What a concept. It's illegal to sell a product that could kill or cripple our children. So why don't we do that? Banning infected poultry is a hard-handed policy. An Alabama poultry science professor explains, the fact is that it's too expensive not to sell Salmonella-positive chicken. Can you imagine a toy manufacturer saying, sorry, we'd love to pull unsafe toys from the market, but such a large percentage of our toys are hazardous that it would be too expensive for us. Next up, Campylobacter, a fecal pathogen that can trigger something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, where you come down with Campylobacter food poisoning once, and you can end up paralyzed on a ventilator. You're not in a coma, you're awake, but so completely paralyzed you can't even breathe on your own. I've seen about a dozen patients with Guillain-Barré. It's like straight out of a buried alive horror movie. Where's Campylobacter found the most? Chicken, turkey, beef, or pork? No contest. The chicken breast. Doesn't seem to be in red meat at all. But is it more than half of the chicken in stores these days, or less than half? Well, it was just under 50%. Still, with a virtual elimination of polio, the most common cause of neuromuscular paralysis in the United States now comes from eating chicken. And finally, E. coli, a general indicator of how much fecal matter is left on or in the meat. Chicken, turkey, beef, or pork? turkey to another surprise finish, but is it more than 50% or less? More than 90%. 9 out of 10 packages of ground turkey, 9 out of 10 chicken breasts are packaged with poop, essentially, and most ground beef in the country has manure in it as well, although less than half of pork chops are contaminated with hog feces. When people think of E. coli, they think E. coli 015787, or other diarrheagenic E. coli strains in retail meats, particularly ground beef. But have you ever heard of this E. coli? You may not have heard of it, but if you're a woman, odds are you felt it, or you will. This is within the class of E. coli that causes urinary tract infections. Intestinal E. coli, like 015787, are bad, but fewer than 100,000 Americans are infected every year, and fewer than 100 die. But millions of women get urinary tract infections, extraintestinal E. coli infections every year, with the potential to invade the bloodstream and cause fatal sepsis or blood poisoning. The strains of E. coli that cause extraintestinal infection are an increasingly important endemic problem and underappreciated killers. Billions of healthcare dollars, millions of workdays, and hundreds of thousands of lives are lost each year to extraintestinal infections due to E. coli. We know where E. coli 015787 comes from, manure in the meat. But where do these other E. coli come from? They come from food too, but which food? Researchers went to supermarkets and tested 1,648 different types of food, and they found it. We now think that urinary tract infections come from eating chickens. Half of retail poultry samples were found contaminated with the UTI-associated strains of E. coli. Scientists now suspect that by eating chicken, women infect their lower intestinal tract with these meat-borne bacteria, which can then creep up into their bladder. In addition to the traditional hygiene measures aimed at preventing urinary tract infections, wiping from front to back, urinating after intercourse, women can now add avoiding poultry as a way to help fend off UTIs. Now, in chickens, the disease is called colibacillosis, one of the most significant and widespread infectious diseases in the poultry industry. Why? Well, in part because of the way we treat these animals. Studies have shown that infection risk to be directly linked to overcrowding on these so-called factory farms. In egg-laying hens confined in cages, these so-called battery cages, the most significant risk factor for flock infection is hen density per cage. Researchers have calculated that affording just a single liter of additional living space to each hen would be associated with a 33% decrease in the risk of a disease outbreak, now linked to human urinary tract infections. That's about equivalent to just a 4-inch cube of space. If each of these birds just got a tiny bit more space, the risk drops by a third. Imagine if the birds could actually walk around, spread their wings, get some fresh air. How we treat animals can have significant public health implications. There's a new superbug in town, Clostridium difficile, known in short as C. diff. You may remember superbugs from such hits as MRSA last year, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, now killing more people than AIDS in the United States. MRSA used to just be something you picked up in hospitals, but then, all of a sudden, there are all these cases found out in the community, and no one knew where it was coming from. Then we discovered MRSA in pigs, veal calves, chickens, and dairy cows. Aha! So they tested farm workers, and about half of them were carrying it. So then they tested the meat and found MRSA right off the supermarket shelves. In the hospital, we have something called contact precautions. Before you can even walk into a room with a patient with MRSA, you have to glove, mask, and gown, even if you're not even going to touch the patient. There's such a concern that you might just touch some contaminated surface, they won't even let you in the room unless you look like this. Yet we still let kids run up and down the meat aisle at the supermarket where MRSA contamination has been confirmed. Now, only about 5% of retail meat tested so far in the U.S. has MRSA on it, but if you went to any infectious disease specialist, offered them an object, informing them that there was a 5% chance it was contaminated with MRSA, first of all, they wouldn't touch it, and if they did, if they had to, they'd definitely glove up. If you handle raw meat, wear gloves, and I'm serious, and wash your hands. What about C. diff? C. diff used to be just something you picked up in hospitals, but then all of a sudden there are all these cases found out in the community, and no one knew where it was coming from. Then we discovered C. diff in calves, cows, chickens, and pigs. Starting to sound familiar? Then they tested meat and found C. diff right off the supermarket shelves. 42% of meat products sampled contained toxin-producing C. diff. The riskiest meat was ground turkey, actually. Relatively common in retail chicken, too, and out of legs, wings, or thighs, the riskiest body part to touch were chicken's wings. And now MRSA causes these nasty skin infections. What does C. diff do? Well, normally nothing. Even if you get infected and your gut gets colonized with C. diff, your good bacteria can usually kind of muscle it into submission. But the C. diff just waits patiently until you have to take an antibiotic, for example, and with your good bacteria out of the way, C. diff can go crazy and cause a severe infection of your colon called pseudomembranous colitis, which can get worse and even turn into a life-threatening condition called toxic megacolon. This man is not pregnant. This man has toxic megacolon. On autopsy, his colon looked like this. Yeah, but people don't eat raw poultry. Doesn't cooking wipe out most bugs? C. diff isn't like most bugs. For most meat, 71 degrees Celsius is the recommended internal cooking temperature. That's what our meat thermometers are supposed to reach. Just to be safe, err on the side of caution. C. diff can survive 2 hours at that temperature. A chicken can be grilled for 2 hours straight and still not kill off C. diff. There's those alcohol-based hand sanitizers say they kill like 99.99% of germs. That 0.01% is C. diff. They don't call it a superbug for nothing. And then residual spores are readily transferred by a handshake even after the use of an alcohol-based hand rub. So you don't want to touch raw meat, and you don't want to touch people who touched raw meat. One of the reasons we are increasingly plagued with new superbugs is the mass feeding of antibiotics to farm animals. As Britain's chief medical officer put it in his 2009 annual report, every inappropriate use of antibiotics in agriculture is potentially signing a death warrant for a future patient. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to debate some of the kind of captains of industry, like the National Pork Producers Council, on this dangerous practice of feeding antibiotics to livestock.
To ask if there's a question between human drug resistance and livestock antibiotic use is like asking if there's human-induced climate change, or if there's a link between smoking and lung cancer. There are a few dissenting industry scientists on one side, but then basically every other scientist on the other. Both opposing camps have scientists on their side, but only one really has science on their side. And one could just look at who's on the sides of this debate. In one corner, you have the World Health Organization, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Public Health Association, another 100 medical and public health organizations in the country. On the other side, you have the National Turkey Federation, the National Chicken Council, the Sheep Industry Association, the National Pork Producers. It could not be more stark.
I've always insisted that the reason it's dangerous to feed millions of pounds of antibiotics to cows, pigs, and chickens every year, in part just to fatten them faster for slaughter, is because this fosters antibiotic resistance in bacteria that can then infect human beings, not because there's a problem with antibiotic drug residues getting into the meat itself. How wrong I was. In a damning report released earlier this year, the U.S. Inspector General slammed the USDA for not protecting the American public. As you can see in the executive summary of the report, one of the public safety issues facing the United States is the contamination of meat with residual drugs, pesticides, and heavy metals. These drug and chemical residues then find their way to our dinner plates, but in order to safeguard the nation's food supply from harmful residue, the USDA, FDA, EPA are supposed to test for these contaminants and prevent adulterated meat from entering the food supply. But, based on their review, the Inspector General found that the National Residue Program is not accomplishing its mission of monitoring the food supply for harmful residues. They haven't even established threshold values for many dangerous substances, which has resulted in contaminated meat being distributed to consumers. And then the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service doesn't even attempt to recall meat confirmed to have excessive drug residues. What's the problem with not having safety thresholds? Well, for example, in 2008, Mexican authorities rejected a shipment of U.S. beef because it contained excessive levels of copper. But since we haven't set a safety level for copper, it was fine by U.S. standards. There weren't any. So, too dangerous to be sold in Mexico, but good enough for U.S. consumers. There are more than 1,000 pesticides approved for use in the United States. The Environmental Protection Agency routinely asks the USDA to test for pesticides that everyone agrees has high health risks, but for many years now they continue to test for only one type of pesticide out of more than 1,000. What's the big deal, though? I mean, what potential effects could the drugs and toxic metals in meat have on people? Bleeding, ulcers, allergic reactions, serious nerve damage, severe inflammation, skin cancers, internal cancers, jaundice, kidney failure, neurotoxicity, kills brain cells, and even death. Doesn't cooking destroy the drugs, though? No amount of cooking will destroy residues. In fact, in some cases, heat may actually break residues down into components that are more harmful to consumers. And then, even when our government finds these drugs in the meat, they don't stop it from contaminating the food supply. The Inspector General noted a case where a slaughterhouse found 4 drugs, ivermectin, sulfadiamethazine, fluorophenocal, and sulfamethazine, yet released the meat from these carcasses into the food supply despite the fact that consuming these drugs could result in stomach, nerve, or skin problems, but the USDA ordered no recall. Now, the USDA doesn't actually have the authority to demand a recall, which is a problem in itself, but they can at any time ask, at least, the company to voluntarily recall the meat. So when's the last time they asked a company to recall their meat due to illegally high drug residues? The USDA hasn't even asked since 1979. And this is not the first time the USDA has been cited for failing to protect the public. This was exposed 25 years ago by the National Academy of Sciences. So what happened? What happened in 1984, according to the Inspector General, is that they signed an MOU. And then the problem remained unresolved for the next 25 years. So that's what we've been eating all this time. So what does the Inspector General propose now? Number 1 recommendation, start from scratch. The government needs to reestablish the National Residue Program so it can accomplish its mission of safeguarding the U.S. food supply. What will be the USDA's response now? Maybe they'll drop another memo. In the meanwhile, if we insist on doing drugs through our diet, which meat has been found to have the highest risk for contamination? It's the veal. I mean, think about how they're raised, Antibiotics aren't the only dangerous thing agribusiness feeds to farm animals. We used to feed cow brains to pigs and chickens, until last year when Obama's FDA banned the feeding of cow brains to most other farm animals, though it should have been a No-brainer. It took 12 years to take that step, and still doesn't go as far as Europe, which bans the feeding of all cow parts to all farmed animals, including fish. Last summer, a group of neurologists raised the concern that by feeding cow brains to farmed fish, the consumption of farmed fish may provide a means of transmission of infectious prions from mad cows to humans. That was in June. It was all just theoretical, though, until July. Researchers in Greece fed infected mad cow brains to fish to see what would happen. And although the fish appeared fine, you could see the disease building up in their systems. The neurodegeneration, abnormal deposition in the brains of fish challenged with prion, especially BSE, mad cow disease, raises concerns about the potential risks to public health. The prospect of farmed fish being contaminated with infectious prions or developing their own prion disease is alarming. This is just for farm fish, though. Wild fish don't tend to eat cows. One of the great remaining medical mysteries is what's behind the dramatic rise in Alzheimer's disease. In a century, we basically went from no Alzheimer's to the 7th leading cause of death in the United States, currently afflicting 5 million Americans. A provocative theory was published last year in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition. Alzheimer's has become an epidemic. 1 in 10 of us in our 60s, 1 in 5 of us in our 70s, and nearly 1 in 3 of us in our 80s will develop Alzheimer's disease. Now, some say it's just because we have an aging population, but if you go back and look at the data, prior to about 100 years ago, there was no evidence of Alzheimer's, no matter how old you were. And even now, it's really only a problem in the developed world. The elderly in India and Africa, for example, are spared the disease. When we look at the epidemiology, we should be shocked. We have allowed something in our environment to steal the minds of our elderly at a terrible cost. As a people, we should be outraged, frightened, and frantically searching for what's in the environment that's causing this terrible onslaught. But instead, the scientific community seems to be passively letting this happen. There's not much research in this area, and most efforts, frankly, are coming up with drugs to try to treat it, rather than trying to prevent it in the first place. Given the link between meat eating and dementia, some scientists have suggested a prion theory. Maybe Alzheimer's is some human variant of mad cow disease. We certainly are eating more beef, but this new researcher is skeptical, believing the real cause to be something else in our developed environment, namely copper toxicity. Interestingly, that could explain any meat-Alzheimer's connection, because meat eating may contribute to copper toxicity. Remember the U.S. meat shipment to Mexico that Mexico refused to let in? That was because of copper contamination. This researcher blames 3 things that developed countries have done over the last half-century or so. Started using copper plumbing for our water, we started taking a lot of supplements like multivitamins with copper, and started eating too much meat. So he suggested we should test our water for copper, throw out any supplements with copper, and then in terms of diet to prevent Alzheimer's, number 3, reduce meat intake, since the copper in meat is much better absorbed. So yeah, blaming meat may actually be right, but this new theory goes, it's not the prions. The damaging agent in meat may be copper. If you or anyone you know is currently starting to suffer from cognitive decline, you're starting to forget things, starting to repeat things, there is some exciting new research published this year. They took folks with mild cognitive impairment and had them exercise 30 minutes a day for 6 months, versus a control group that just stretched for half an hour every day instead of exercised. Here's the data. They did a test of cognitive performance at the beginning and then repeated it at the end of 6 months. And as you can see, in that 6-month period, those not exercising, just stretching, continued to decline. At the end of 6 months, both men and women got fewer correct answers than they did when they started. Now, what they were hoping for is that by adding exercise, they could slow down this decline. So if instead of just stretching every day, if they were doing aerobic exercise instead, getting some blood to their brain, maybe they'd only decline half as much, or ideally not at all, stay the same, have 0 fewer correct answers. But this is what they found instead. The cognitive decline reversed. They actually did better at the end of 6 months than when they started. Drugs can't do that. Exercise can. We've known that physical activity can reduce breast cancer risk, and appears to work especially well at preventing estrogen receptor negative tumors, the hardest ones to treat. But only last year did we figure how much exercise was needed. We've known that light exercise doesn't work, like a leisurely stroll appears useless for preventing breast cancer. And we've known that fewer than 10 minutes a day of even good exercise doesn't work either. How many minutes of moderately intense exercise, hiking, biking, swimming, aerobics, or even just fast walking, does one need, on average, every day, to significantly decrease breast cancer risk? Less than 10 minutes doesn't work, but how about a full 10, 15, 30, 45, or a full hour a day? Well, it's not 10, it's not 45, and it's not 15. We need an hour of exercise every day. Darwin was right, it's survival of the fittest, so let's get fit. We've known for years that soy helps prevent breast cancer, and that evidence continues to grow. And the earlier we can get our daughters to eat soy, the better, as that's where we see the strongest protection. If you remember from my Volume 2 DVD, we learned that women who have breast cancer who eat soy live significantly longer. But what if you're on tamoxifen, a drug breast cancer survivors can take to help prevent a recurrence by blocking the effects of estrogen on the body? So if you're trying to wipe out all trace of estrogen activity, do you want to be eating the phytoestrogens found in soy? Fact or fiction? Breast cancer survivors on tamoxifen should avoid soy. Fiction. In the Life After Cancer study, following nearly 2,000 breast cancer survivors, women on tamoxifen who ate the most soy had a 60% reduction in breast cancer recurrence compared to women who ate the least amount of soy phytoestrogens. They cut their risk of cancer coming back in half just by eating soy. The phytonutrients in soy responsible for lowering cancer risk are called isoflavones, a type of flavonoid. There are also flavonoids in chocolate, but where are they found the most? According to a new study this year, in terms of phytonutrient content, is the healthiest chocolate fix baking chocolate, chocolate syrup, cocoa powder, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, or semi-sweet chocolate chips. Here's the graph. Which one takes the cake? Cocoa powder is definitely the best way to get your chocolate fix. You know how dark chocolate is like 70% cocoa solids? Well, cocoa powder is like 90+% cocoa solids. That's basically all it is. Number 2 is the baking chocolate, which is number 3, though. The semi-sweet chips are actually number 3, with dark chocolate number 4. Any guess as to last place? Well, they're both pretty useless, but the hint is the genuine chocolate flavor.